Thanks to all of those out there attending. Great to be sort of guest hosting here as well with my sister company, Techonomy. And Christina, it's great to have you here as well. And just as Josh has been noting, please put your questions into the chat string. We'll be, both Christina and I will be monitoring those in real time. And I'm looking forward to this discussion. So Christina, welcome.
Thanks, thank you.
So before we dig into the meat of this conversation, just tell us a little bit about your remit and your role there. I mean, it sounds like a fascinating job, and maybe you could just take us through a little day in the life of Christina Montgomery here.
Yeah, sure. So thanks again for having me here today. It's great to be speaking with this group. So I have a very unique and exciting job for a number of reasons, right? I'm a chief privacy officer, which is a field that is growing and evolving every day. I happen to work for a tech company, which I think is fascinating in and of itself, being a chief privacy officer in a technology company when technology can play such a significant role in privacy. And in a company, a technology company where trust and security are foundational to our strategy. So it's fantastic. And I am a career lawyer by background, but a business lawyer. I've been a lawyer for IBM for many years. So I've been working in close partnership with the business. And this role gave me the opportunity to move into the business. So our chief privacy role right now with my remit sits as part of the business. It was in the law department prior to me stepping into it. And so a part of what I do is I'm responsible for the privacy program on a global basis, scaling our operations and our governance on a global basis, policy and compliance issues that come up every day, particularly helping to have conversations with governments around the world, with companies around the world on the evolving nature of regulation around privacy. I also chair or co-chair our AI ethics board in IBM. So lots of issues there around operationalizing the governance and scaling trustworthy AI and taking that to the next level in IBM. So in any given day, I can be from deeply embedded in the business with research teams, thinking about what types of technology will better help us to comply and scale, to hearing from clients what they want to see from a privacy perspective, to reporting up because our governance in both privacy and AI ethics is overseen by the most senior levels of the company in IBM. So to dealing externally with universities or with governments or with policy teams or industry associations, whatever that may be. So it's very diverse, it's very dynamic, and it's a fascinating role.
That's great. We appreciate that background. Before I sort of really get into the meat of privacy here, COVID so dominates everything and is the reality and state of our lives. I'm just curious, how has the crisis so far sort of impacted you and your teams and the broader culture at IBM? And maybe look at that from a management and leadership point of view for you and your teams and how it's changed, to this point and how it might change, permanently the culture moving forward and any thoughts and advice to people out there in regards to management and leadership style through this crisis and where we may go beyond this.
Yeah, I mean, speaking from an IBM perspective, our values over the years have been pretty consistent and have shaped our culture. We've got, 3 primary values in IBM that we sort of operate to as a company, and you do see them play out, and particularly in a time like COVID, and just at a high level, their dedication to every client's success, innovation that matters for our company and for the world, and trust and personal responsibility in all relationships. And so just like 2 examples of that, which when you're faced with something that happens as quickly as it happened,
right,
and has such a scale, such an impact, immediately, from an IBM perspective, IBMers see a problem and want to solve it, right? So we immediately started seeing initiatives in IBM where IBM was applying the best of its technology and its people to try to help. Right. And in particular, initiatives around acceleration and discovery, where we helped with the government to create the high performance computing consortium that will dedicate compute power to helping to discover treatment and a cure for COVID. And on the trust and information side of the house, you may be familiar with, like the weather company is an IBM company. And there's trusted information on that about COVID that tracks in your region. You can sort of like getting a weather forecast. You
Right.
could see what the latest COVID technology is there. So people immediately jumped in, tried to solve a problem, but at the same time, while working on important matters, IBMers really did try to take care of each other. So like very early on, I think I want to say early April timeframe, there was a grassroots effort in IBM that was widely adopted, including by the CEO, that we called the Work from Home Pledge. And it was, I pledged to take care of my family. I pledged to look in on my neighbors. From a manager's perspective, we had already been doing this. I mean, you mentioned from a leadership perspective, what are things that you do? Reach out to your team on a regular basis. More so than usual. I happen to have a primarily virtual team. Like, I don't sit in the same office. My team is very global given the role that I have. So most of my team is already virtual, but you check in more often because it's a very stressful, very strained time. Pledge not to be camera ready all the time. This is like, I actually got dressed up for you guys. But now I'm finding myself in front of the camera with my team in like a t-shirt and, my hair pulled back and I'm like, sorry guys, but this is what you get today. Or I don't go on camera.
Right.
So those types of things, just the supportive nature of IBMers and wanting to help. And like I said, I think it sort of brings out the true stripes of a company. And I was really pleased to see how IBMers came together.
That's great. I appreciate that. So we're talking about privacy, and it's a big sort of setup question. How do you define, or how does IBM define privacy? I mean, there's privacy as it relates to personal communications and data communications, but how do you define privacy, and then that based on that definition, how does that inform and drive your job, your role?
Yeah, I listened to some of your prior speaker and the evolving notion of privacy, right? I mean, the notion of what is private changes depending on where you are in the world, and the time frame. But I would say the best way that we think about privacy in IBM comes down to trust. So we've been a responsible steward at IBM of our clients' most sensitive data for 109 years now. We were the first company in our industry to appoint a chief privacy officer, and that was back in 2000. So it's been 20 years we've had somebody in that role. We helped form the IAPP. We were one of the founding members. And for those who are familiar or who follow the privacy debate, that's the Industry Association of Privacy Professionals. It's like the largest community of privacy professionals. It's a global organization. And part of what that organization does and what we do, I mean, we follow those conversations and the evolving norms of privacy around the world. So I wouldn't say there's one definition. And I think the important part is staying in tune with your principles and your values as an individual and as a company, especially a global company, and staying on top of the debate and helping to influence that debate as regulations change and as people think about privacy in different ways.
Do you have a different type of construct in terms of how you and your job with your teams look at, let's say, data privacy versus, let's say, personal privacy? With my events at CDX, with the weather company, Bryson Kohler, who was the former CTO, CIO, used to speak at our events. And when he would go through the amount of data that the weather company was processing, not just about weather data, but about consumer data as well, it was just overwhelming. And then on the facial recognition stuff, now we're talking about sort of more personal privacy versus data per se. So do you look at them differently, or do you have a similar construct about how you go about developing a policy at IBM as it relates to sort of data privacy versus other personal privacies or other sort of civil liberty types of issues as it relates to privacy?
I mean, it's a consistent approach. So we have underlying principles. We call them the principles of trust and technology that we came out with publicly a couple of years ago now, but we've kind of always adhered to. We have always followed them, but vocalized them and sort of put them down right on paper a little while back, and they apply pretty much consistently across the board to various businesses. The Weather Channel is a little bit different. It's a consumer business. And for those who aren't familiar with IBM, it's unique from an IBM perspective because of the fact that, 99% of IBM is a business to business. So our data is not our data, it's our clients' data. Their businesses, they own it. And that's one of our first principles of trust and transparency, is that, the data creator owns the data. The others are, we believe that artificial intelligence will augment humans, not replace humans.
Right.
And the third is that we believe that all technology ought to be deployed transparently and explainably, right? In an explainable manner. Those principles apply. I say the Weather Channel is different only from the perspective that there are some different technical rules that apply to it, but the same principles apply across the board from an IBM perspective. So we look at them consistently. We apply our principles and values-based approach. And we try to be, from an operational perspective, as consistent as possible with our privacy program across the globe, because you can't scale something if you're looking to make one-off changes on a country by country basis, or on a offering by offering basis. It's just not realistic.
Yeah, and you had talked a little bit about augmented reality, and Kendall, if we could bring up the results of the poll. So for those who didn't quite catch the early results, here we go. And this was the climate change poll, which I think we're going to pull up a different one here, in terms of augmented reality and facial recognition technology. And this is an interesting, just a quick canvas of our existing audience, and I suppose pretty predictable through the middle here, and somewhat opposed, neutral, and somewhat supportive. I mean, maybe some of this just has a lot to do with facial recognition technology at this advanced level is so new, right? People still getting their heads around it. Do I like it? I know it can help solve crime maybe, but I don't want to be tracked. So that's a good sort of segue just in regards to this decision. And I'll sort of read it sort of literally here in regards to that the company no longer will offer, develop, or research facial technology. I mean, it's a huge statement. It's a huge sort of, I don't know if I call it a shift, but it's quite an announcement in regards to no longer offering, develop, or even researching facial sort of recognition technology. Can you talk a bit about this decision and sort of how it came about? Is it someone at a meeting, brought it up and then it got momentum, or how did this come about? And what went into this decision in terms of the real breadth and just sort of finality of it all as well?
Well, so we, as I mentioned earlier, are responsible stewards. We view ourselves as responsible stewards of technology. And that means not just responsible stewards in protecting our clients' data, but when we bring new technologies into the marketplace, we want to ensure that we're doing that with transparency and with clear purpose, right? So we've been following the conversations around facial recognition and other ways that technology, can either be biased, or, the conversations you have around AI for years now. And we had an opportunity to kind of engage with respect to facial recognition at this point in time from a public perspective. But we, last year too, came out with a policy. What we've been trying to do in this space is to we've been involved in very early work on principles with the European, the OECD, the high-level expert group, in helping to form and create principles around artificial intelligence.
Right.
And we've been taking those principles now to the next step, trying to evolve that and put that into practice and make recommendations from a policy perspective and adopt that with respect to our own business as well. So we came out with a policy position on facial recognition technology last fall that called for regulation of high risk use cases of facial recognition technology. So it's been an evolving, follow the dialogue, sort of an evolving approach to technology as well over time, following the conversation. And with the ethics board that I chair, we review use cases of new technologies, business use cases, and the like, to ensure that we're applying those values I mentioned earlier and the principles I mentioned earlier to business opportunities. So it goes beyond facial recognition. We want to make sure, again, that the solutions that we deploy, the opportunities that we pursue, are deployed in an accountable way, are consistent with the values and the ethics that we have as a company.
No, that's, and in regards to, you mentioned the AI ethics board earlier as well, and I'm very curious about that. And we're getting a little short on time, so I want to make sure I get to it in terms of, can you talk about, an AI ethics board? I mean, that sounds a lot to discuss in any given meeting, I would suppose. Can you talk about the board and sort of who's on it? And I believe you said it meets twice a week when we were sort of doing our prep. But tell us a little bit about that and what ultimately its goal is and how that came about.
Yeah, so the AI ethics board is really a little bit of a broader mandate than AI. It's really about tech ethics and the ethics around new technologies in general. But that being said, AI is a significant part of our business and the conversations around, ethical technology.
Right.
So essentially, this is the mechanism whereby we try to ensure that we're taking a consistent approach to opportunities around the world and ensuring that our values and principles are applied to them. So it's cross-disciplinary. It's a team of senior business unit members, other corporate function members, and we have also a network of focal points in all the business units throughout IBM. So that we can scale the ethics board approach. It's not just a tops down by any means, a tops down approach. It's really very much a bottoms up and a tops down. Bottoms up to help inform and be our eyes and ears and tell us what clients are looking for and tell us how you work on a daily basis and tell us what you need as a developer or what you need at various stages and help inform the policies and the cultures and help to scale that culture going out. So it's kind of a network from that perspective. And it leverages the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, IBMers are problem solvers. And I never realized until we started having these conversations at a corporate level, how many people so deeply care about this topic and want to be involved in this topic and do the right thing as a company. So it's really been it's been a fantastic organization to be involved in. We're continuing to have new work streams that start up, new ideas that are created by IBMers in sort of a groundswork kind of a way. So it's been great. And recently we also announced, I'll mention it here, a tech ethics lab with Notre Dame, the University of Notre Dame. And we're going to explore some of the issues that the ethics board has been discussing sort of internally. We are going to work with this lab to kind of envision that lab as being sort of a preeminent place for ideas and research and policies that can help inform the ethical conversations around emerging technologies like AI, to help ensure again that it's created and deployed with a complete understanding of its impact on society. I mean, that's our goal. So that's what the board is working towards.
That's great. And before I hand over to Josh here, my last question is, how do you stay informed in regards to trends around, security, and privacy? I'm sure there are some of the usual publications that you read that we all know, but is there anything maybe a little more obscure and interesting and to geek out on privacy and security that you stay updated on out there, a blog or an interesting newsletter, or it can be a publication or a trade association, certainly?
Yeah, I mean, this area is so ripe with information. Just as a mainstream person trying to follow everything that's published on a daily basis in privacy and AI ethics would be virtually impossible. So I do follow sort of the trade, so it's like the IAPP daily report to see what the news is and dig deep on things that I find interesting or publications coming out of governments, the European Commission, the European Data Protection Board, the US privacy debate as well. I try to follow everything there, obviously. And vendors also come up with some great publications as well. Law firms, Hogan Lovells has a blog on data protection. That's a really good source of information as well. There's podcasts, the Privacy Advisor, where you can kind of listen to a conversation about this. So there's just so much great stuff out there, and hopefully, I know a lot of conferences are going to be virtual this year, but
Right.
it's there are more conferences every month on this topic than any one
Yeah.
person. You'd get a million miles in 6 months if you tried to
Right.
attend them
Well,
all.
those are great. Those are some great nuggets, some great suggestions there in regards to some of the blogs and the law firms and things like that. But Christina, it's been great having a chat with you. I could easily go another half an hour and keep talking about this and geeking out on security and privacy. But thank you again.